Parents of Reddit, what is the creepiest thing a friend of your kid has done at your house? 11-year-old kid comes to my house. Friend of my daughter's. She goes into the bathroom, takes a crap and then calls out for assistance. Apparently her parents still wipe her butt. Sorry kid, this is not a service I offer. Yeah, unless she's disabled. You're on your own kid. Some neighbor's kid started pouring rubbing alcohol into our aquarium. Good thing we caught him early. I saw a grown butt man pouring vodka into his own aquarium. It was at a house party and I thought there wasn't any fish as he was jokingly asking if they would get drunk too and party with us. Lo and behold, half an hour later he was devastated. Not a parent, but once at a sleepover when I was about 12 my dad ordered pizza and one of the girls kept stepping on a slice and using it as a foot massager. My dad is still perplexed by this even over a decade later. Whoa, that's genuinely bizarre. I would love to know why she was doing that. I can't even think of the slightest explanation. We had friends at church who were very nice, but somehow ended up with deeply disturbed children. I walked in on their son masturbating with half of the peanut butter sandwich I had just made him. Wow, he sounds like a total nutter. Tried to kill my baby by smashing his head between the couch and coffee table. I told the mother. Next night she says, yeah, he tried to do it to the dog. I think we may have a problem. Oh yeah, that's where we should draw the line. Christ. Ugh, I have a 12-year-old and 7-month-old baby. Some of the creeps my 12 years old brings home makes this story eerily relatable. So glad baby was okay, but seriously WTF. For my daughter's birthday, which is in April, I typically invited her whole class to her birthday party. Each year the party was usually a cookout and I would get a kiddie pool set up and we always had a swing set and trampoline as well as yard games and toys. The kids would come over typically around 1 or 2 p.m. and stay a couple hours, eat, have some cake, play games, open presents and then leave. One year, when she was 9, a girl from her class was dropped off like all the rest and her mom said to have her call when the party was over and someone would pick her up. This particular year it happened to be spring break that week, so there was no school. The party ended. We called the various parents to pick up their kids and this particular child. We had to leave voice messages. Hours passed. All the children save that one had long since left. We continued to call and leave messages that all went unheeded. Night fell, so we loaned her some PJs and it turned into a sleepover. Now, we are white and lived in the country. This particular child was black and apparently had recently moved into the area from a city. She didn't know us, had never met us, and had only known my daughter as a classmate for maybe a month. It didn't matter to me that she was black. It just seemed to me like that if I was a child left behind in some strange place with people I didn't know, that being a different race would only enhance the scariness. Nope, not this child. She was happy as a lark. Day 2 morphed into day 3. We continued on life, now with an extra child. We continued to leave messages on the only contact number we had. We went shopping, out to eat, carried on with our lives. The girl said she didn't know people live like this, out in the country. By day 5, we had debated on calling the police and reporting her as abandoned. We decided to try to find her house. She knew approximately where she lived, so we went and drove around and around the neighborhood until she recognized her house. An older brother was there and he let her in and didn't really say much of anything. The next day, her mom rolls up in the yard with the girl and 3 of her younger siblings. We had apparently forgotten her swimsuit when we took her home. The mom asked if she could leave the kids there while she ran a quick errand. I told her that unfortunately, we were getting ready to leave ourselves and I was sorry. She got mad and yelled took off in a huff. Truthfully, I was afraid she was going to leave all the kids and just not come back. It was really weird how the girl just seemed to accept that no one was coming to get her. All the other kids I know would have been crying and hysterical wanting to go home. The girl finished out the school year and didn't come back in the fall. I guess they moved away. That's one of the more fricked up ones. I would have called the police and CPS on day 3. Not to do with me, but my dad told me when he was a kid his neighbors, also kids, broke into his house when they were out and sacked the place, including cutting their pet goldfish in half. My dad's parents found out and the neighbors' parents made the kids clean up the house. I hope that wasn't the extent of their punishment. Breaking, entering, and vandalizing is serious. I'm the weird kid in this story. There was this kid I used to hang out with all the time. I used to go over to his house and we played video games for hours straight. This one time, me and another friend went over to his house to ask him if he wanted to come play with us. They weren't at home, but they had their cleaning lady in their house working. Now I can't remember if it is the lady who invited us in, or if we invited ourselves and given our familiarity with the place, but one way or another we went inside and helped ourselves with his video games, completely unaware of the weirdness of the situation that we're in. The lady even brought us snacks. They eventually came back to find two kids in their living room playing video games. His mom got upset with the lady, I think, but I do remember her calmly explaining us that it was not okay and we shouldn't be in their home again unless they are home. I really wasn't the brightest kid. No parent, but as a kid I'd have this friend that would kill small animals, try and shove my little sister down the stairs, and do all sort of twisted stuff. Needless to say, he ended up in jail for robbing a place, I think. Guy wasn't fully there, didn't come from a broken home or anything either. His parents were absolutely lovely. Still talk to his parents to this day. Him, not so much. I grew up on a small dead-end street and we were the only ones with a pool, so we spent a lot of our summers in our pool. There was this one neighbor who weirded us all out. He was a hardcore druggie and we found him passed out drunk in his pickup a lot. Well, his niece and nephew came to live with him because their mom died, so they started swimming with us too. The girl was older than most of us and also larger. A few times she decided it would be funny to push a few of us underwater and hold us there, especially me since I was the smallest and youngest. We stopped letting them come over after that. Not a parent. This happened to me as a kid. I was sleeping over in a friend's house, Andrew, with another friend, Armin. So we were playing video games and crap till late. Andrew sleeps in its own room as it's his house and my other friend and I get to share a room with a big bed. We were like 14, so it felt a little weird as straight teens. We are there just awake talking and we begin to hear some weird noises, like some white noise and some faded voices and then white noise and then a little music, louder and lower and louder again. We rise and go to face the music and in the living room there he is, our friend just wearing underwear, placed on his knees playing with the buttons of the radio at 3 AM completely asleep. We ask him, "What you doing, man?" "Yeah, right." Then he turns and screams, "I am creating magic." We thought he was possessed or something and we went straight to their parents' room and they told us he sometimes sleepwalks. When we come back to him he is just sleeping in the floor and they walked him back to bed. This is why you'll never become more than a muggle. Not a parent, but this happened when I was about 11 or 12. I was sleeping over at a friend's house, let's call him Joe, and there was another friend staying over, Tom. Joe and I were upstairs in his room playing Xbox at like 10 PM. Went down to the kitchen to get a glass of water and see Tom sitting on a couch in the dark staring blankly at nothing. I was like, "UHH, what are you up to, man?" And he just straight up looks me in the eye and goes, "I'm talking to my grandma." This dude's grandmother died when he was like 4 or something. Needless to say, I noped the frick out of there. Never saw that kid again. Dang, this is pretty intense. I wonder if he may have been sleepwalking to some extent and just dreaming about his grandma. Spooky either way. I haven't had any real creepy incidents as a parent yet, apart from the odd random friend exploring the house and finding their way in our bedroom, but I am planning a camp out sleepover for my 11 years old soon, so I might have a good story then. In the meantime, when I was a kid, this strange family moved in a couple doors up from us and had a daughter around my age. She didn't attend school with me and was clearly intellectually challenged. She decided to be my friend, coming over all the time even if no one was home. She was obsessed with my dog, a young boxer pup, and would play with her whether anyone was home or not. She would come into the house uninvited and find my mum on the toilet and casually chat with her. Poor girl had no social etiquette or anything. I truly felt sorry for her and would share my homework with her, but she couldn't read or write. We were probably 10 or 11 ourselves. Anyway, after about 6 months my mum was fed up with this girl coming and going and making herself at home. So mum approached her parents and tried to find out what the deal was. Mum could see an abused child a mile away and decided to call CPS. They were investigated and the girl was taken into emergency foster care. Mum couldn't take her in due to the proximity of her parents. Turns out they had been prostituting their daughter out to pay for their alcohol and she hadn't been in school since year 2. It was so horrific. We found out shortly after their landlord was evicting them for no rent payment. We received a death threat in our letterbox for my puppy, literally stating that since we took her daughter they were going to take something of ours. Police had to evict them, and 1 week after that, my little pup Jeddah went missing. Small town and the only red boxer, but she never came home. I'll never forgive them, but I hope their daughter got a decent life far, far away from those monsters. Not my story, but a friend's. One time when she was in 2nd grade, my friend had another friend over at her house. At one point, they were just sitting on a couch when all of a sudden, the other kid started choking my friend on the floor. She barely had enough time to call her mom. The friend wasn't allowed at her house anymore. Not a parent, but I recall this very vividly. I was friends with this kid at my school whose parents didn't really care for him. So when he all but invited himself over one weekend, his parents dropped him off with food on the street corner and just kinda left. Mind you, I have no sidewalk on my street. It's just ditches and then a very heavily trafficked road. So he walked along the side of the road to my house and entirely expected to then stay for most of the day. When my parents called his parents to come get him, they made some excuse about how he'd said he'd be staying the night, which I'd never agreed to, and we forced them to come pick him up. When everything was said and done, it wound up being his 16-year-old brother who came to get him, who I later learned couldn't legally drive at the time. Maybe not creepy, but honestly a very weird and disturbing situation to find myself in the middle of. Oh, that's really sad for the kid. Super weird for you for sure, but also sad. Thought it was creepy at first, but this kid, who was the first friend I made in my new school, always came over to my house. After school he was there. Weekends he was there the first thing in the morning. Holidays and summer he basically lived with us. He never wanted me to go to his house. Found out his mom was an alcoholic and beat him. His dad died in a car accident back when he was 10 years old, so I told my mom this and she never turned him away, even times when I wasn't there. He eventually lived with us from 8th grade until junior year in HS, when his uncle got out the military and took him in. Wholesome. Thanks for sharing. A friend of my older sister spent the afternoon at our place and tried to drown me in the bathtub when I was a baby. My mum walked in and stopped him. She wasn't very pleased. Mum was telling me of a story from when I was 6 when my friend killed a lizard in front of everyone and laughed. A girl came over to my house and did come super psychopath I want your life crap. This girl I knew from 1st grade came over for a sleepover. We must have fought over something, because I went up to my room because I got so mad at her. I forget why. It must have been big though, because I'm not one to march out on a guest. Anyway, while I'm upstairs crying, I see in the mesh pocket of her away bag a bright pink Easter egg with some fur stinking out of it, and I realize I hear faint squeaking. I go over, pick up the egg, and it's warm and shaking. I open it and my pet mouse like explodes out of there. I'm absolutely horrified. I see in the bag all of my favorite toys and some of my clothes. She took them and squirreled them away in her clothes to try to hide them. I go downstairs with the Easter egg, ready to absolutely raise heck with my evidence, only to see my mom in the kitchen quite shaken already. There she is, looking down at my pet guinea pig in its cage, nose bloody, right front paw torn off, and obviously dead. This kid was sitting on the couch watching TV acting like she had no idea what happened. In less than 1 hour this kid brutally murdered my pet, tried to take another one for later, and planned to take my favorite toys and even some of my clothes. My mom was like nope. Sent me to a friend's house and drove that kid home because she wasn't waiting for her parents to come get her. When my mom talked to her about it while in the car, she said the girl said I just wanted to be like her. Never saw that kid again. Hope she's safely locked away somewhere. Okay, that is creepy as heck and slightly traumatizing. Like holy crap. Not a parent but a friend of mine did something pretty weird. We were 11 or 12, and my family went on vacation for 2 weeks. When we returned home we walked into our house but no one turned on the lights in my family room for like 20 minutes. I turned them on and my friend was just staring at our television, which was off, not saying a word. Didn't respond to my first few attempts to head his attention until he randomly snapped back into it. Creepy crap walking into your house after a vacation and turn on a light and see a kid who's zoned out. He has some mental problems and was heavily medicated as a kid. came over to hang out often and knew we kept our side door unlocked. Needless to say, we established some more rigid boundaries after. Yo, what the frick? One kid at my place used to try and kiss my dog's butt. Dog's name is Vince McMahon. When I was about 12 years old, I was at a friend's house building things with Lego. My friend goes to the bathroom and about 5-10 minutes later I hear him yell down, "Mom, I need a wipe." Since I was a curious kid, I followed his mother when she then proceeded to open the bathroom and wipe a 13-year-old son's butt for him. I thought it was weird even then. Sorry kid, this is not a service I offer. I had a work friend bring her kid over to play with mine. He was 8, I have a boy who was 7 and a girl who was almost 5 at the time. He told her she was going to have a baby and had her lay down and take off her pants and panties. My son knew this was wrong and came to tell me before anything else happened. My friend was super embarrassed and we actually didn't talk much for a few months because we were both uncomfortable with it. We tried to get together in a public place a couple of times since then, but it just wasn't the same anymore. I had already quit working with her before the incident, but I'm still kind of sad at losing my friend. Obligatory, not a parent, but there was this kid that I was friends with for basically all of elementary school and his mom let him do anything. He watched R-rated movies when he couldn't have been older than 7, never brushed his teeth, had his own computer, etc. So you can see how he was more knowledgeable than me in the freaking department. Well, anyways, one day me and him were at my mom's house alone and he dropped his pants and tried to make me suck him off. Since I guess he thought I would just go along with it, well, I didn't understand the physical implications of that at the time, but I knew it was gross, so I pulled his pants up and told him how gross it was and went back to playing Pokemon. Obligatory, I'm not a parent, but this is something me and my parents talk about to this day. I had a slumber party in 1st grade and invited probably 8-10 girls. Can't remember how or why, but we all ended up in the bathroom. One of the girls has to use the bathroom, so we all walk out, except one girl. She stood there and crap on my bathroom wall, right in front of the other chick. Her excuse? The other girl was on the toilet and she couldn't hold it. Girl was a frickin' weirdo to begin with. She ended up being my roommate last year and was just as fricking strange and 10 times more annoying. On behalf of everyone, please tell us some roommate stories. Grades 1-3. I was friends with a girl who had issues, adopted from an abusive home before we met. She would randomly decide to just leave our playdates to walk herself home, which was not possible because she lived a good 20-minute drive away, some of that highway. My mom describes her as nice, but kind of eerie sometimes. When I was a kid, I had one of those asshole friends who was more of a friend of my video games. You know the deal, coming over constantly to play single player games, demanding me to give him food and all that jazz. One day he came over when I was away somewhere. No one answered the door, but he noticed that the window to my room was open, so the sucker climbed in, turned on my PC and tried to play something, but he heard my mom coming out of the shower, so he bolted. Told me the next day at school and I told everyone including my parents. Then school and his parents got involved and Jay got in a ton of crap for that. Hated me ever since. Not a parent, rather, I was the kid in this story. My mum got engaged to this rich guy whose daughter was a couple of years younger than me. Growing up, she had practically every animal she'd ever asked her dad to buy for her, but over the years, once they eventually died, she buried them in a corner of their backyard. One day she showed me the little rocks she had put on top of their graves as makeshift tombstones. I suggested that we dig up the bodies so we could see what they looked like. She said no and afterwards ended up coincidentally staying at a friend's place every following weekend that I was due to stay at her dad's place. Sorry, Ash. I was 4 years old and my first cousin tried to get me to give him a BJ several times. I didn't like the idea because that's where P comes from, so I told my parents. He was around 9 at the time. Her mother, my aunt, dismissed it by, well, he must have learned it in school, don't pay attention to it. A different incident came between our families and I haven't talked to them in over a decade. Can't say I am devastated. Went into the kitchen and then ran into the bathroom. He comes out half an hour later and I ask if he's okay. He says sure and gets back to playing video games. I went into the bathroom later that day and found a cucumber caked in crap sitting in the trash can. It smelled bad and had specks of blood. Not the parent, but this was my brother's friend. Flashback to the mid-2000s, where LAN parties were all the rage. All-nighters, sugary drinks, and junk food. One kid didn't know his limits, and had a little too much to eat, and a little too much to drink. He ended up throwing up. Not the end of the world, but he didn't tell anyone. Since there were 2 bathrooms nearby, nobody noticed this one was out of order either. So, the kid didn't just throw up in the toilet, but the wood floors, the walls, the ceiling, the counters. That was the absolutely most disgusting thing I have ever seen or smelled. We literally had to remove all the wood from that room, floor, trim, cabinets, etc. All of it ruined. We ended up just putting tile in there, since we couldn't find a way to make the new wood match the rest. This kid ended up costing over $10,000 in damages, cleanup, deconstruction, rebuilding the cabinets to match the rest of the house, and reconstruction, with one glorious vomit session. Jesus Christ. It wasn't at my house, but at the neighbors. My parents were somewhere, so my sister and I were supposed to spend the day and have dinner at the neighbor's house. They had a mentally disabled daughter that they refused to admit had any problems at all, so she was basically a holy terror to be around. Dinner time came and I had a big plate of spaghetti in front of me, and the daughter walks over to me and grabs a fistful of spaghetti off my plate and stuffs it in her mouth. The thing was, this girl was disgustingly filthy. She drooled constantly, and her parents didn't seem to think she needed washing, so her face and mouth were perpetually crusted with dried stuff, and her hands were always in her mouth. So no freaking way was I eating that plate of fist noodles. She hadn't even looked at her own plate of food, so I just stood up and moved to her spot at the table and prepared to eat. Now the mother starts yelling at me to get back to your own seat, and I said, Jamie, put her hands in my food, I'm not eating it, and she says she doesn't have cooties. Now eat your dinner. I sat there staring at the plate, and just thinking about eating it was making me gag. When they started pressuring me to eat it again, I got up, ran back to my house, and locked the door. Stayed there until my parents came home. So when my parents got home, they were told a completely different story. That I was throwing food and running around the table, wouldn't sit down. After I told them my version, it was clear that things made more sense since they knew the daughter had problems that the parents wouldn't acknowledge. We live in a middle-class neighborhood next to a park. On the other side of the park is a poor neighborhood with low-income apartments, run-down houses, and a trailer park. Whatever. I grew up poor. I don't judge people based on their wealth, and it meant my house was cheaper. My son made a friend that lived in the low-income apartments. At first the kid seemed nice enough. He was polite, and that is always a big bonus point with parents. One day both boys were off playing at the park when I got a knock at my front door. It was a friend. I asked him where my son was, and the kid said, "Oh, he's coming." We were racing and I got ahead of him. No big deal. I let the kid in and he went back to my son's room. After a while I realized my son still wasn't home. The other kid was in my son's room happily playing with Lego. I was weirded out but not sure what to do. A little while later my son came home and blew up. He did not want this kid, or anyone else for that matter, in his room when he wasn't home. I pulled my son aside, apologized, explained what happened, and promised it would never happen again. I told the kid that we were about to go somewhere and that he needed to go home. The kid asked if he could stay and play anyway. I told him no and shooed him out the door. The kid came by my house a few days later when my son was spending the night with his grandparents. He asked if he could borrow one of my son's Xbox controllers because he had a cousin spending the night but only one Xbox controller. My son wasn't there to say yes or no, so I let the kid borrow one of my own Xbox controllers. We parents have our own Xbox in the living room. I told the kid that I would need the Xbox controller back the next day. A few days later my husband had to go to the kid's house and get the controller back from the kid's mom. The kid had, apparently, planned to keep it. Then the kid started coming by our house when our son was off playing around the neighborhood. He'd ask if he could come in and play and we'd tell him that our son wasn't home. He'd ask if he could come in and play with our son's toys anyway. The answer was no, but the kid kept coming back and coming back, hoping to weasel his way into my son's room again. My son stopped being friends with him because he figured out that the kid didn't actually want to be friends with him. The kid just wanted to ride my son's ripstick and play with his toys. but the kid kept showing up to our house when our son wasn't here and asking to be let in to play with our son's toys. Even tried lying his way in a few more times. Finally, my husband got fed up and went and talked to the kid's mom again and the kid quit coming to our house. Perhaps not creepy, and not entirely my kid's friend, my friend's kid. She was in a bind and didn't have anyone to keep her kids after school, so I told her they could come home with my son and hang out while she finished up her first day at a new job. First, her younger son, Q, is a bit on the spectrum, so his quirks in general. He hadn't been over before, but we had hung out many times, and he looked up to my son as a favorite friend, and the older son was good friends with my kid. We live in a crappy apartment in a very nice part of town, and Q acted as though he had never, ever been inside an apartment. Many times he expressed how little it was and how he couldn't believe that people in our neighborhood could have an apartment. Q also loves World War II, and told me many facts about generals. He was quite taken with Russia, and referred to it as Mother Russia while using a terrible fake Russian accent. I happen to do an amazing Russian accent, which he loved, so if I wanted him to do anything, I had to ask it in the Russian accent. I also have decorated my apartment a bit whimsically, with a ton of animals and gnomes and other things sort of around in interesting scenes. My niece was over once and counted my animal related things and came to the conclusion that 23 animals live in my living room, but similar paintings art. Q was distressed that they weren't named, so spent the afternoon naming most of them, but not cutesy pet names, which is why I now have a gold dinosaur named Brian and a porcelain rabbit named Kevin, along with a few other adult male named animals that I can't recall. Brian and Kevin get asked after regularly, though, and my son still occasionally remembers to call them by their name, even though this was over a year ago and Q has only been over again one time since then. This is actually kinda sweet. A kid took a crap on our stairs and tried to blame me. Not a parent, but when I was about 7 years old I went over to my friend's house and she told me I had to drink a ton of water, so I did. Later, she told me she had a fun idea and got out some plastic Walmart bags and said we should pee in them together. She was really secretive about the whole thing and I was pretty uncomfortable. Not too long after, she followed me into the bathroom at school and told me that if I didn't pee on her hands, she wouldn't be my friend anymore. I didn't want to do it, so I just accepted that I was going to lose a friend. I told my mom when I got home, and she seemed really concerned and called my friend's parents. I didn't understand why at the time and sort of shrugged it off as something really weird my friend did as a kid, since the girl in question grew up to be totally normal. However, a few months ago I was recalling the story when hanging out with my mother, and I found out that she had been physically shamed by her uncle and was making me do what her uncle made her do. I'm not a parent but know someone's kid who killed the neighbor's guinea pig and was playing with the lifeless body for like an hour. Like the cartoon Lenny, played too rough and fricked it up. The kid was 4 at the time. Frick, that reminds me of a little cousin of mine who put his kitten in the toilet, closed the lid and flushed the toilet over and over so it would stop meowing. It eventually drowned and he put in the trash can next to the toilet and went on to play video games. He was 6. Kid fricking scares me. The 5-yo twins from next door walked into my house without knocking or being invited and sat down in our living room and started playing with my kids' toys. I asked if they were okay, and one of them replied, yeah, our parents need some alone time so we need to be here for a while. About 15 minutes later, they both stood up at the same time and walked out the door without saying anything. Oh, the shining twins. My daughter had a friend come around when she was 7 or 8. This girl was pretty odd and obviously used to getting her own way, but the weirdest thing was one day when I was in the kitchen and they had been playing outside. I am renovating our house and there were no baseboards so you could see under the house. It looks creepy as an adult, but kids have vivid and wild imaginations. They come running in and she grabs a sharp knife from the kitchen drawer. I stop her and ask her what she's doing. My daughter says they are going to kill the monster under the house. I tell her to immediately put that knife back. But we need to kill the monster and then they both start to run out again. I very firmly tell her to put it back. Now, she does. We told her mother about it but she is not very good at the whole parenting thing. I shudder to think what could have happened. That sounds like the intent was harmless. Give them a butter knife and tell them it's just as effective, but the monster won't see it coming. I'm not a parent, but I have so many of these. Once, my mother took me to some kind of cookout celebrating a bar's anniversary that she frequented. There were a few other kids there and I quickly made friends with them. We were all super talkative and friendly with each other, save for the younger sister of one of the girls. The younger sister would stare at me and always stand a little off from the group and mumble to herself. Well, while we were playing something akin to Pictionary in the dirt, she decided to come up behind me and put me in a chokehold. I was panicking since I obviously couldn't breathe, and the group of kids had absolutely no idea what to do. After just a few moments, her parents quickly ran over and ripped her off of me. Bonus: my mother insisted the kid never choked me and she was just playing. Another time, I was the creepy kid. I was staying at a friend's house for the night for her birthday. Before we all laid down, we had scared each other with stories and creepy videos. I'm easily scared and kept imagining a monster under her bed, so I couldn't sleep. Instead, I kinda sat in the hallway and tried to fall asleep there. I guess her dad came home from work because he walked into the house, rounded a corner, and saw me there hunched over and unresponsive when he called out. He went into the bedroom her mom was staying in, but I felt embarrassed so I got up and went back into the room all the kids were in. Our door was cracked, so I overheard him walking back into the hallway and saying, "I swear there was a kid here." She was just sitting there and the mother replying, "Yeah, okay, go to bed." Bonus: he peeked into our room after that and saw everyone asleep. I closed my eyes when I saw him approach the door The last one is just funny. Dad got bamboozled. When my niece was 3, we babysat her and her friend. Dog was barking. Friend stared at him and he stopped and slunk away. Wouldn't go in the same room as her the whole time. Never babysat that kid again. Parent of 2 girls. In preschool she had a few boyfriends who were about the same age as her who would come over quite often. One day I walked in on what I thought was this kid reading to her, but he had his dong out. I promptly yelled at him, asking what he thought he was doing, and he simply replied with, "I'm teaching her to read backwards." With your dong out? That's how I taught my wife to read backwards. Not a parent, but my dad told me a story about me. He was taking me to the park. I was playing with geese, and he got distracted talking to moms in the park. Then he heard a very loud goose scream, turned around and saw that I was choking the poor thing. I was 3 at the time. He had to grab me and leave the park to avoid freaked out and judging moms. Dong blocked your dad, LMAO. When I was a kid I used to have to hang out with my mom's co-worker's child. We couldn't afford a babysitter, so sometimes my mom would babysit us and sometimes the co-worker would. We were like maybe 9 or 10, but it was very apparent that this kid had no sense of what authority meant. His mom would give him anything he wanted. He basically controlled her like if she were a puppet, and he had the strings. The kid also loved to get very physical, and this was annoying because I was a small kid when I was little and very weak, so I stood almost no chance. The kid would push me, attempt to punch me, and quite literally attack me out of the blue, and since his mother had no control over him, I basically felt alone. He got really into WWE and started trying to perform all those moves on me, so he tried flipping me, and honestly it felt like I was always on the defensive. I ended up learning how to mentally manipulate him as he wasn't the brightest. This meant that I would constantly derail his thoughts by mentioning movies, games, or literally anything that would mentally stimulate him until I was out of harm. I actually got really good at this, and ended up being able to manipulate the mom into getting us McDonald's or Burger King by planting that seed into the kid's brain, which he would then yell at his mother until she followed his command. It honestly taught me at a young age that people can indeed be manipulated, and that sometimes you don't need to be stronger than someone to defuse a situation. Apparently the mom also wasn't the brightest. Not a parent, but a teenage male cousin's friend drilled a hole into the bathroom wall from his bedroom for presumably peeping. Said little cousin lived with his grandmother. Sigh. Yo, what the frick? My daughter was about 8 when she had a friend sleep over. They were asleep, supposedly, when we looked up and the girl was just standing there staring at us. We were in our room with the door open so we could hear. Creepy. My nephew actually does this sometimes, and if you wake him up from it he freaks out for hours. It has something to do with him having autism. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video.